He moved like a ghost on the mountain, silent, precise, fast, so fast that people doubted it was even real. Ueli Steck didn't just climb mountains, he danced with them, sprinted up walls that used to take teams days to conquer. They called him the Swiss machine. But Ueli wasn't a machine. He was human. Maybe too human. On the morning of April 30th, 2017, Ueli woke early just like always. He was alone on the icy flanks of Nuptse, a peak shadowed by Everest. It was just a training climb, something simple for a man who had defied death 100 times before. But that morning, something went wrong. And the man who once flew up the north face of the Eiger in under 2.5 hours fell 1,000 meters to his death. What happened? How does a man so prepared, so experienced, so aware, simply vanish into the void? And what kind of life must you live for the entire world to pause when it ends? This is the story of Ueli Steck. The triumphs, the tragedies, the rivalries and rescues, his obsession with going faster, higher, harder, not for fame, not for fortune, but because he had to. Because deep down, something in him needed to see how far a human being could really go. And maybe he got too close to the answer. Long before the world called him the Swiss machine, Ueli Steck was just a quiet boy in the Emmental Valley of Switzerland. He grew up in a small village surrounded by soft hills and snowy peaks, where the air smelled of pine and cold mornings. As a kid, Ueli played ice hockey, fast and fierce. But something about the mountains always pulled his attention upward. He was 12 the first time he tied into a rope. A friend of his father's took him climbing and, without hesitation, tossed the boy on lead. No training, no gentle introduction, just a rope, 2 pitons, and 1 instruction. Don't fall. That moment, terrifying and thrilling, sparked something in him. The mountain didn't scare him, it fascinated him. From then on, Ueli didn't just climb, he consumed climbing. He trained obsessively, pouring every hour of free time into rock walls, ice faces, and thin alpine air. While other teenagers were figuring out who they wanted to be, Ueli already knew. At 17, he conquered his first serious test, the east pillar of the Scheidegwetterhorn. And just 1 year later, he stood at the base of the Eiger's North Face, staring up at one of the most dangerous and legendary walls in all of mountaineering. He and his friend Marcus If climbed it in 2 days, a slow time by his future standards, but to a young kid barely out of high school, it was life-defining. What stood out wasn't just his talent, it was his mind. Ueli wasn't climbing to impress sponsors or rack up likes. He was methodical, focused, quiet, always analyzing, always preparing. In those early years, he didn't have much. Borrowed gear, secondhand boots, ice tools from friends. But none of that mattered, because from the very beginning, Ueli understood something that would guide the rest of his life. Greatness doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you're willing to do, every day, when no one is watching. And for Ueli, it was just the beginning. The Eiger Laboratory. The Eiger wasn't just a mountain to Ueli Steck. It was a canvas, a test track, a place where he could measure not just his skill, but his soul. By his late 20s, he had already climbed nearly every major route on its fearsome north face, a wall that once struck fear into even the bravest alpinists. But Ueli wasn't afraid. He was obsessed. In 2007, he made headlines by climbing the Eiger's North Face in 3 hours and 54 minutes. A staggering time. But what shocked the climbing world even more was what he did next. He went back. He returned to the mountain like a scientist to his lab, analyzing every step, every swing of the axe, every inch of terrain. He trained with sports scientists, hired a nutritionist, a mental coach, and even a personal trainer, all to shave minutes off his time. And it worked. By 2008, he'd done it again, soloing the entire wall in 2 hours and 47 minutes. Then in 2015, he returned one more time and crushed his own record. 2 hours, 22 minutes, and 50 seconds. He was ascending at nearly 700 meters per hour. To most climbers, speed was just a byproduct of fitness. But to Ueli, speed was safety. The faster you move, the less time you spend exposed to danger, falling rock, changing weather, avalanches. And on the Eiger, every second mattered. But this wasn't just about numbers. Ueli once said, "It's a bit like my laboratory. This territory I know so well that I'm confident to explore my limits." The Eiger was more than rock and ice. It was a mirror. It showed him who he really was and who he could become. Because for Ueli Steck, Climbing wasn't about escaping death. It was about chasing perfection. And the Eiger was where he got closest. If the Eiger was Ueli's laboratory, then Annapurna was his crucible, a mountain that nearly killed him, but that he couldn't let go of. In 2007, Ueli made his first attempt on Annapurna's infamous South Face, one of the deadliest walls in the Himalayas. The mountain struck back. A rock, big and fast, slammed into his helmet, knocked him unconscious, and sent him tumbling 300 meters down the face. Somehow, he survived. He hobbled off the mountain with bruises and cuts, but no rescue, just grit. Most people would have never returned, but Ueli did, not once, not twice, but 3 times. In 2013, on his 3rd attempt, he climbed into the darkness alone. No Sherpas, no oxygen, no ropes fixed above him. It was just Ueli, a headlamp, and the 3,000-meter vertical face of one of the most dangerous mountains on Earth. He started at base camp and returned in just 28 hours. What he did that night bordered on madness or genius. And yet, when he got back, there were no summit photos, no GPS track. His altimeter broke during the climb. Whispers started. Did he really summit? Was it all real? 2 Sherpas claimed they saw his headlamp near the top, and the climbing community eventually gave him the benefit of the doubt. He was awarded the Piolet d'Or, mountaineering's highest honor, for what Outside Magazine called one of the boldest Himalayan climbs in history. Still, the doubt stung, and it stuck. But maybe it didn't matter to Ueli, because Annapurna wasn't about glory or awards. It was a battle between him and himself. And he won, in the most extreme way possible. He once wrote, "To walk through life in a comfortable way is not my goal. I want to implement my dreams and visions into reality." On Annapurna, he did exactly that, even if no one could ever truly understand what it cost. Long before he raced up the face of Annapurna, Ueli Steck showed the world a different kind of courage. Not the kind that wins awards, but the kind that defines character. In 2008, Ueli was climbing in Nepal when word came through the mountain radios. Iñaki Ochoa de Olsa, a beloved Spanish climber, was in trouble high on Annapurna. He had suffered a stroke and was stranded at over 7,400 meters. No one knew if he could survive the night. Ueli didn't hesitate. He dropped everything and started climbing. No camera, no press, just him, ice axes, and urgency. He raced up through avalanche terrain carrying medicine and oxygen. He wasn't thinking about glory or risk. He was thinking about saving a friend. He made it to Iñaki, but it was too late. The stroke had taken too much. Iñaki died in the snow with Ueli by his side. That rescue attempt didn't make Ueli faster. It didn't make him richer. But it revealed something deeper than any record ever could. Compassion, loyalty, humanity. It's easy to celebrate Ueli's speed and strength. But this moment, this selfless act in a deadly place, might be the truest summit he ever reached. And it reminded the world, Ueli Steck wasn't a machine. He was a man, a good one. In the spring of 2013, Ueli Steck returned to Everest, not to summit, but to prepare for a bold new traverse between Everest and Lhotse. What unfolded instead was one of the ugliest moments in modern mountaineering history. It started high on the Lhotse face, just above Camp 2. The Sherpa team was fixing ropes for the commercial climbers below. A dangerous, meticulous job. Ueli, Simone Morrow, and Jonathan Griffith were climbing nearby, careful not to interfere. They weren't using the ropes. They weren't in the Sherpa's path, but in the chaos of high altitude, where every movement is magnified by thin air and fatigue, misunderstandings grow quickly. The Sherpas believed Ueli's team had disrespected them, climbing too close, causing ice to fall. The Westerners denied it. One Sherpa slipped and hit his face. Rumors spread like wildfire, and then things exploded. That afternoon, back at Camp 2, more than 100 furious Sherpas confronted the 3 climbers. Rocks were thrown, threats were screamed, fists flew. It was violent, it was raw, and it was terrifying. "I went out and this whole crowd was there," Ueli said later. "When I saw they had their faces covered, I knew this was going to be really bad." He would later admit, "I thought they were going to kill us." The next day, a Nepalese army officer helped broker a fragile peace. The climbers descended. The Sherpas returned to work. But the scars remained. It wasn't about one incident. It was about years of tension. Between Western climbers chasing glory and Sherpas risking their lives for a paycheck. That day, Those worlds collided violently in the thin air of the death zone, and for Ueli Steck, something inside shifted. He left Everest that season, not because he had failed, but because something sacred had cracked. Something about the mountains he loved no longer felt the same. Ueli returned from Everest changed, not physically, but emotionally. The brawl at Camp 2 didn't just bruise his body. It bruised something deeper, his spirit. He wasn't used to being hated. He wasn't used to headlines calling him reckless or arrogant. He'd spent his life building a reputation on discipline, humility, and respect. But suddenly, he was cast as a villain in a story that didn't fit him. Privately, Ueli was devastated. The media frenzy, the online speculation, the political tug-of-war between climbers and Sherpas, it all weighed heavily on him. "I'm not a machine," he said, quietly in interviews. "I have emotions like everyone else." He later admitted to close friends that he was depressed, not because of guilt, but because of how quickly the mountains could turn people against each other. He spoke with Elizabeth Hawley, the legendary Himalayan chronicler, who told him bluntly, "You shamed that lead Sherpa." And in Asian culture, this is the worst thing that can happen. That moment stuck with him, not as an accusation, but as a lesson in cultural depth, in how fragile trust is in places where survival depends on it. For Ueli, the mountains had always been about purity, the raw, honest search for personal limits. But now, Everest felt noisy, corrupted, commercial. It was no longer just about the climb. It was about politics, ego, image. He withdrew for a while, focused inward, trained harder, climbed quieter. He stopped chasing records for public approval and started chasing something even harder to reach: peace. And maybe that's the irony. The man known for moving faster than anyone else was slowly learning how to carry a burden that speed couldn't shake. Ueli Steck wasn't just fast. He wasn't just strong. What truly set him apart, what made him legendary, was how he thought. He believed that greatness didn't come from a single heroic act, but from 1,000 invisible decisions made in silence. Early mornings, quiet suffering, endless repetition. He trained like an Olympian but without an audience. There were no medals, no cheering crowds, just ice, rock, and will. He once said, "There are dreams that are worth a certain amount of risk," but his risk was never reckless. It was calculated, grounded in a lifetime of preparation. He logged every heartbeat, every footstep, worked with sports scientists, studied his body the way a pilot studies weather. What Ueli chased wasn't adrenaline, it was mastery. He wrote in his journal, "I think we are still very far away from the perfect alpinist." Even at the peak of his fame, he saw himself as incomplete, still learning, still becoming, and maybe that's why people couldn't look away. Because in a world obsessed with shortcuts and spectacle, Ueli reminded us that real greatness is quiet, that the most powerful climbs are the ones that transform us. Steve House, one of his closest friends, said it best. He had a certain earned wisdom that is rare in this world. Ueli wrote a great and profound story with his life and his climbs. He wasn't chasing mountains, he was chasing himself, a better version, forged in ice and wind, somewhere high above the clouds. And with every summit, he got a little closer, in the stillness of the mountains where there are no crowds, no claps, and no finish lines. That's where Ueli Steck felt most alive. He didn't climb for records, he climbed to change. Not just the view around him, but the person inside. He believed the summit wasn't the goal, transformation was. "You cannot stay on the summit forever," a quote he loved said, "but what is above knows what is below. And when one can no longer see, one does still know." That was Ueli's truth. Climbing made him see. It showed him who he was and who he could become. In a world chasing more, faster, louder, Ueli chose silence, precision, purpose. He proved that it's possible to be both elite and humble, fearless and kind, obsessed and human. When others saw danger, he saw beauty. Where others saw limits, he saw opportunity. And while many climbers searched for fame on Everest, Ueli searched for something quieter, something sacred. And that's what made him different. That's what made him unforgettable. In April 2017, Ueli Steck returned to Nepal with one last dream: the Everest Lhotse Traverse. It was a project so ambitious that no one had ever completed it. Climb Everest via the rarely attempted Hornbein Couloir, a deadly exposed line on the mountain's north face, then descend and continue straight to the summit of Lhotse, the fourth highest peak in the world. No oxygen, no high-altitude support. Just Ueli, his partner Tenji Sherpa, and the thin line between brilliance and risk. "My body is as strong as it was never before," he wrote. He wasn't being arrogant. He was focused, committed. He believed in active acclimatization, moving fast and light instead of sitting and waiting. And that meant constant motion, constant climbing. But then, Tenji suffered frostbite, serious enough to be pulled from the climb. Ueli was suddenly alone, not just physically, but emotionally. The rhythm, the momentum, the shared goal, gone. Still, he didn't stop. On April 29th, Ueli changed plans. He texted Tenji, "I go Nuptse," a nearby 7,800-meter peak. He'd climb it solo as part of his acclimatization. He didn't say much more. He never responded to Tenji's reply. At 4:30 the next morning, Ueli left camp for what should have been a routine climb. By all accounts, the weather was clear. He was seen partway up the mountain by other climbers, moving smoothly as always. Then, silence. No radio, no movement, nothing. Later that day, they spotted his body 1,000 meters below. Motionless. Shattered. Gone. What caused the fall? No one knows, and maybe no one ever will. Because in the end, Ueli Steck didn't die chasing a record. He didn't die taking a shortcut. He died doing exactly what he had always done, climbing alone into the silence, trusting in the strength he had built over a lifetime. And the mountain this time didn't let him come back down. The news spread like wildfire. Ueli Steck, the unstoppable, untouchable Swiss machine, was dead, found broken on the icy slopes of Nuptse. No dramatic footage, no final words, just a body retrieved by helicopter, wrapped in silence and flown back to Kathmandu. The world stopped. Climbers cried. Even those who had never met him felt the blow, because it didn't feel possible. How could a man so careful, so calculated fall during a simple acclimatization climb? But that's the truth of high mountains. They don't play favorites. They don't care about your strength, your resume, or how many times you've stood on top. One mistake, one slip, one moment, and it's over. Ueli once said in a video, "If you have an accident or if you die, that's definitely not successful. But all the other things, that's already a success." It was never about a perfect ending. It was about the journey, the risks he accepted, the dreams he chased, the quiet way he changed what we thought was humanly possible. And in the end, maybe that's what hurts the most. Not just that he died, but that he still had so much more to give. Ueli Steck was more than a climber, more than a record holder, more than a legend. He was a reminder that in a world drowning in noise, discipline and passion still matter. That perfection is worth chasing, even if you never fully catch it. He didn't conquer mountains. He listened to them, learned from them, gave himself to them, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but legacy. His ashes were blessed in a monastery in the shadow of Everest, where monks chanted prayers for the man who had soared higher and moved faster than almost anyone before him. From there, his remains were flown back to Switzerland, the same mountains where his story began. He left behind no children, no long speeches, no farewell interviews, just a body of work carved into ice, granite, and history, dozens of first ascents, records that still stand, and a spirit that lives on in anyone who's ever looked at a mountain and felt something stirred deep in their chest. British mountaineer Kenton Cool called him a true inspiration, someone who showed us all what was possible in the mountains and beyond. And Steve Howe said it best. We needed to hear what Ueli had learned through his alpinism over the next 40 years of his life. The world is poorer with this abrupt end to his story. Ueli Steck died young, but in 40 short years, he wrote a story that most people wouldn't finish in 100. He moved like a machine, but he climbed and lived with a heart that beat louder than any stopwatch. And maybe, if you listen closely in the quiet places where snow falls soft and thin air burns your lungs, you can still hear him moving, still climbing, still dreaming.